There. I should be recording.
Now I see it.
Where do you see that at?
It pops up in the top left on Zoom for me.
Huh. Okay, cool. I can't say I do. I see the stop share, but I don't see a recording. Anyways, okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We've talked about sockets. We've talked about port numbers. And now we're going to write a port scanner. And Troy, I don't remember, or Lindy, when you took Python, I don't remember if we did a port scanner that semester. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. What does a port scanner do? You feed it an IP address and it tries to figure out what ports are open. Like if you're going to do nefarious deeds, port scanning, if done quickly enough and with large enough groups of computers, could actually be considered a form of denial of service. However, servers are so good nowadays that a mere wimpy little program that we write in Java is not capable of generating nearly enough traffic to cause a problem. So for example, I wonder if there are port scanners available online. Port scan, online port scanner. Well, what is the IP address of Rose? Let's ping Rose and get its IP address. Ping rose.edu. There's its IP address. All right. We're going to do a light scan on this thing. I don't know what this is doing. I've never done this. I'm authorized to scan this target. Okay, I'm going to say I am. Scan now. And it runs for a little while, and it should tell us that port 80 is open. And I don't know what all it told us. Don't really see a list of ports that's coming. Maybe it's because it's still running. But anyways, this should spit out a list of ports. And if it's a really awesome port scanner, then it should even list what those ports are, like whether it's the HTTP port or stuff like that. Yeah, here we go, right? Rose has got two ports open, 80 and 443, according to the so-called light scan that this thing does. Well, we're just going to start at port 1 and go all the way to 65,000. We're going to try them all. The problem is that each scan takes a couple of seconds to do, right? Because you know yourself, if you try to access the internet, it can take a couple of seconds before the server starts spitting any data back. And if you have 65,000 different ones and each one's taking a couple of seconds, it would take a long time. So we're going to start off with a simple scanner, like where you just specify a port number and an IP address. And then we're going to extend that so that it runs in a loop. And then we're going to do some weird, wacky stuff where we make it multi-threaded and we do something called future, which creates a whole bunch of calls that go off and run and then come back with their results. So let's do some of that stuff. Are we on Lecture Z yet? One of my classes actually hit Lecture Z.
I think we are on Lecture Z.
Whoa, cool. All right. I guess we better not do another one. No, I'm kidding. Let's make a Lecture Z. I had a student have a heck of a problem. They bought a new computer or had to reformat the computer, and they needed to reinstall NetBeans in Java. And they downloaded the installer for NetBeans, and it turned out to be completely incompatible with the newest version of Java. And it's because it was relying on some libraries that have been removed from the newest version of Java. And it took us a long time for us to figure that out. He lost like 2 weeks from that. And we found this old version that the school uses, the Java 8 and NetBeans 4 from 2012 or something like that. But it downloaded and it worked for him. Enough chatter. 2613 Lecture Z port scanner. Let's get rid of the project. I mean, a package. All right. Alrighty. So let's refresh our brain about how we open a socket. So we know that we're going to need the socket class. So we may as well just include java.net.asterisk. So come up here and import java.net.asterisk. And I know that for the second part of this, where we start creating threads, we're going to need some stuff inside java.util. We want java.util.concurrent.asterisk. Import java.util.concurrent.asterisk. And it also replies upon list, which is like array list. It's just a little bit more genericized. And mostly I'm using this just because the example did. I don't know if there's a real reason to use an array list as opposed to a list. We could just import java.util star and that would give us a list. And we're going to need java.io.asterisk for exceptions that the sockets might cause, right? Java.io.asterisk. All righty. Well, let's make a variable that'll hold our IP address, right? 52.4.133.208. And so I'm going to write the code outside of the try block and then let it add the try block. So socket, lowercase socket equals new uppercase socket. And now we're going to try a socket connect. Then this seems to show it a slightly different way than we did in the past, but that's okay. We're going to use inet socket address. So inet socket address address equals new inet socket address. And we need to specify our IP address and the port, right? Now we don't have a variable for port yet. So let's do that. Port 80 is HTTP, I believe. Hope so. Didn't our scan return that? Yeah, 80 is HTTP and 43 is secure HTTP. All righty. And now we can open the socket with that address. Well, we already have. Now we can open our connection. So socket dot open. What I wonder is if we could do this in the opposite order. Could we create the socket based on that address? I'm going to move that line down here and feed in address to the constructor and see if it'll do that. It wants an exception handled. No, it doesn't accept that. Okay, undo those changes. It's too bad. All right. So socket dot connect. And they called it endpoint. And I guess endpoint may be a groovier word than address, because it's who I'm talking to on the other side of the world. Now this is the one that's going to want us to surround the block with try catch. Now, if I do surround the block with try catch, it's probably going to include these things as well. So we may wind up moving those out, but let's do that. Yeah, I'm going to take these two out, put them above the try, and eventually we're going to convert this to its own function, right? Its own method. It's getting sloppy now. Let's clean up the presentation. I don't want their logger. It spits out way too much information. Well, I'll show you what the information looks like. We're going to try to open port 79, which doesn't exist. If we get to the next point, it means it worked. So let's print an OK message, but let's close our socket. What's this? Convert to try with resources. Why not? No, undo that. All right. I mean, it'd be okay if it did it up here, right? If we just cut that line and put it here, and then we wouldn't even have to call socket.close. It'd do it for us. All right, let's print out our message. System.out.println, parentheses, quote, port, okay, space, end quote, plus, I should have just used printf. Let's do that. Printf, parentheses, quote, port, %s for the IP address, %d for the port number, okay, \n, end quote, comma, IP, comma, port, like that. So that's when it worked. Down here is when it failed. I'm just going to copy that message and paste it down here, but instead of printing out OK, it's going to be the error message from the here. So let's add the word error space %s, and we need to fill in that placeholder. So ex dot get message. Now I'm expecting this to fail because we have a port number that's not open on the row's address. And it's taking a while for it to figure out. Taking a long time for it to figure out. We did not specify a timeout period. So when we created our new INET address, we can specify a timeout. I don't know. How many seconds are we going to let it time out? 200 milliseconds. Why are you giving me grief? Do I have that on the wrong one? It's supposed to be on Socket Connect. Sorry. Undo that. Do it here. And why don't we make a variable for timeout? Int timeout equals 200. So on Socket Connect, we're going to specify that. So this is what's changed. And I'm curious what that parameter actually is. So I'm going to retype the method just so that I get the documentation up. Dot connect endpoint timeout. Timeout is measured in milliseconds. All right. Undo all that so I get my stuff back. There. All right. So I changed that so that, and I added that so that it will not hang forever waiting to try to access that port. We finally got a message, error, operation timed out, but who knows how long it took. We don't want it to take that long. Run it. All righty. Connect timeout. It timed out very quickly. That's good news. Let's specify 80. Timeout successful, right? That port is okay. When we print the error out, if we send it to system.err rather than the system.out, it'll color it red. It also does one other slightly different thing, I think. But if I run it now and I change it back to 79, it'll print the error out in red. That's just for funsies, right? And there we go. Or maybe we'd rather print the OK messages in red, right? Okay. So if anybody was typing along with this and you need this longer, that's fine. And I just realized that the chat method, the chat utility can let me send entire files. So if you ever get stuck at a point and you want a copy of the entire file, I can send it to you. I can post it, to the class with the chat tool. I didn't notice that until today. All righty. So are we ready to move on? Don't know why I have this in 2 lines. There. Now, one thing that pardon me?
I said I'm good. I
Okay.
typed it all.
All righty. The one thing that the example I was using did is they declared absolutely everything as a const. The person who had the demo code that I learned from, absolutely everything was declared as a const. So I'm going to go ahead and do that too. But I want to move this into its own method. I'm going to try to see if NetBeans will do a good job of it by highlighting all of that and doing refactor, introduce, method. Doesn't matter whether it's public or private or what. How about we call it test socket? Now it's probably going to make it void, and I'm going to change it to be Boolean so that we can return true or false. But for now, all right, so it made a method called test socket, all well and good. The parameters are constants, also well and good. I'm going to format it a little bit differently. I never did find the video I wanted to show you about that. All right, so anyways, there we go, right? But I'm going to make it Boolean. If we get to this point, it's okay. So I'm going to return true. If we get to this point, it failed. And so, or I'll actually just stick it down here, return false. So hopefully it'll run now. And since it's port 80, it worked. We could stick this in a loop. I'm going to scroll back up here, and I'm going to iterate the port for int I is equal to 0, I is less than 500, semicolon, I++, and tests that with that port number. Gosh, I wish I could move this bar somewhere, the canvas bar. I'm going to try. Okay, here we go. Run it, and it's churning away. I mean, waiting 0.2 seconds isn't that bad, right? It supposedly should just take, can do 5 per second. But if we were checking all the way out to port 65,000, it would still take a long time. And I don't know how low we could slip that to a minimum and still have the results be accurate, right? I don't know if we can lower it to 10 milliseconds rather than 200 or whatever. So we're going to take a different approach. We're going to create a multi-threaded version so that we can be checking like 5 different ports at the same time or 20 different ports at the same time. It'll speed it up enormously. Kind of wanted to get to that secure socket one, which is in the 400s. I don't remember its exact number. I should memorize this so I don't have to keep, yeah, 443. It'll get there. Nah, I'm not going to wait. Oh, it won't take that long. I'm going to pause the recording for a second. Except I don't know how to pause it. I know how to end it, so I'm not going to pause it. Almost there. Yeah, and 443 was also okay. All right, that's enough. It's working. It'd be fun to have another server, or I could run it against myself and see if it ever found a port. But I'm going to wait to do that until I have a faster version of it. All right, so we have this. What are we going to do now? We're going to write a version that can launch itself as a thread. And it's going to use a class that I honestly have never used before. I mean, I've done multi-threaded applications, but I've never done it with the future class, which is about what we're going to do, which is what we're going to do. And so we might go and Google up what this is doing here. So I want to create public static future with a capital F. And it's a template just like array list is. And so we need to specify what it's going to carry. And it's going to carry Boolean with a capital B because all templates require reference types and not primitive types. And let's just call it port is open. And what do we need to take as our parameters? Most likely the IP address and the port and the timeout, but we also need something called the executor service or executor. So let's do that. Final, lowercase final, executor service ES, comma, and we want the IP and the port and the timeout, right? Final string, capital S, IP, comma, final int, port, comma, and final int timeout. Like I said, the guy was really hung up on declaring everything as a final, and there may have been good reasons for it, and it wasn't called out in the code samples. Alrighty, so what this does is we have to create a task, and a task is something that can be launched in a thread. And what it's going to do is this marshals groups of threads at the same time so that we can have 20 threads going at the same time or the like. We'll do a little bit of, reading up. I'll Google up what future does. We'll look at it together and what callable does. So callable Boolean parentheses in parentheses. Oh, I'm sorry. That was supposed to be task there because that's the name of our variable. And then task equals new callable and this creating of anonymous functions like this always bugs me, but it's what we're going to go with because that's what the code examples do. And so we're going to override the call method. So add override public Boolean call parentheses in parentheses. And here we're going to return the results of our test socket call, right? Here's what test socket looks like. So let's come back up here and return test socket based on the IP address and the port and the timeout. Cannot find simple test socket. What did I call it? Let me guess. I did underscores because that's how old-fashioned I am. There we go. All right, and since this is actually a statement, right, rather than a pure definition, then we need to end it in a semicolon. And then we need to return the value of submitting the task. Well, what does submit return? It returns a future T. I'm going to break this up into 2 steps. I'm not sure it's going to make it look pretty or not. And then ret is equal to es.submit of the task. And then let's return that. Obviously, we could have done that in 1 step, and maybe it would have been better. Why don't we do that? Let's just stick the word return there, delete that, and delete that. But we know that it's returning a future Boolean value based on the method definition. It's about time to look up what future does. I think so. Java doc future. A future represents a result of an asynchronous computation. Methods are provided to check to see if the computation is complete, to wait for its completion, and to retrieve the result of the computation. The result can be retrieved using the method get when the computation is completed. Otherwise, it blocks until it is ready. Or you can cancel the computation if you don't feel like waiting for it. Additional methods are provided to determine if the task completed normally or was canceled. Once a computation is completed, the computation cannot be canceled. Well, of course not. The thread's exited. If you would like to use a future for the sake of cancelability, but not provide a usable result, you can declare types of the form future ? And then return null. So if we wanted to launch that as a thread and let it run, but we were going to never check the results, then instead of doing future angle Boolean and return true or false, we would do future, angle ? And return null. Note that the following classes are all made up. Okay, so that's what Boolean does. How about that executor? Let's look that one up. It's not letting me click anywhere. Please don't crash on me. Am I still live, guys? Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I can't do anything. My Mac is totally hung. Thanks, Mr. Mac. Forgive me for trying to reference a web page. All righty then. I hope, like last time, when I force a reboot, it keeps